Okay, ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to welcome you all here. We're not all here, there'll be a few people drifting in, I'm afraid, but it's really good to see you here, and especially some old friends and acquaintances from old days in Canberra. And I hope you all have an interesting and enjoyable time. Let me introduce myself. I'm Chris Hamer. I'm the President of the World Citizens Association of Australia, which is the local member organisation of the World Federalist Movement. And I'm also the President of a transnational working group called the Coalition for a World Security Community of Democratic Nations, of which I'll be speaking after lunch. Our other colleagues here are Bob Flax, who's shaken hands with me here. He's as it says there, a professor at Saybrook University in the US. He's on the board of the World Federalist Movement, the global umbrella organization. He's a former executive director of Citizens for Global Solutions, which is the US arm of the movement and probably the biggest in the world. And he's a major influence within the entire movement. So he's been a moving spirit. So he's going to speak to us today. And then we have Louise Bispo, who's a secretary and of our World Citizens Association. He's also the communications and outreach director of the World Federalist Movement, and he's been a linchpin of both organisations. So he'll be looking after the technical side. He'll be conducting the Q&A session after the event. So this morning we have Bob's presentation, which is, really interesting. Goes into the history and the ideas of the movement in depth. And that'll be followed by a Q&A session. I should say to those following online, you can submit your questions in the chat box, I suppose, and Louise will put them afterwards, comments and questions. This afternoon, we've advertised a symposium on pathways to a global democracy, where I'll be presenting the ideas of our CWSC, our coalition, on the best way to get to a global democracy. Housekeeping matters. The bathroom or the toilets are just across the corridor. Yes, the session will be streamed to those who register for online access, and a recording will be sent to people afterwards. Yes, I think that does it. Anything more I should say? If not, I'll turn the meeting over to Bob Flax, who will
Thanks.
make his
Hello
presentation.
again, for the second or third time for some of you, and the first time for one of you. So, as Chris said, my name is Bob Flax. I'm from the United States. I'm the out-of-town talent that was brought in. What Chris didn't mention is I'm on the tail end of a 4-month vacation, basically, which is kind of why I'm dressed half vacation clothes. Went through 5 countries in Southeast Asia. Last one was the Philippines. I'm thrilled to be here. I almost couldn't get out of the Philippines. I spent like 3 days in the airport, various documentation issues and stuff like that. It was I was on texting with Chris. I don't know if I'm going to make it. We may have to cancel. So I'm thrilled that that I made it. We're here. Usually we wouldn't do an event like this over the summer. Everyone's gone and all. But since I was in the region at the time, Chris set this up knowing that there'll be fewer people than the full complement, but we do have some people online at all as well. So anyhow, got my cheating notes here that I want to say. Oh yeah, so I like to customize what I say, even though I have a presentation to the audience. So first, I just want to ask, how many people are familiar with the ideas of global democracy, world federation, things like that? Anyone? in the room? Okay, well, you, of course. Okay. I hope you raised your hand. Okay, and someone, okay. Anyone involved or either a student or working in international relations or foreign affairs or anything of any kind? Okay, also a couple. Okay, terrific. So you kind of have a mixed audience. Okay, that's fine. I just, like to be able to, comment more specifically. So, so let me just say another couple of words about what brought me here, other than escaping from the Philippines and all. So I'm originally a psychologist. That's what my doctorate is in. I worked in hospitals, clinics, agencies, private practice, and 16 years in the California prison system. Now, I don't know the prison system here, but I could tell you in the United States, it's not the best place. And it's a system really that's horribly corrosive to the human soul in a lot of ways. And as a psychologist, we deal with human suffering, but we do it on an individual level or couples or small groups or whatever. But I was really kind of taken aback at my time here. And I'm also the first psychologist to be assigned to work on death row full time in California. So they still execute people there. And there were, at the time I was there were 530 inmates on death row and one psychologist. So which the courts forced, if the prison didn't even want to do that. So, so I was really struck after being trained and working individually. I was really struck by how these large systems also cause human suffering. Not just individual psychopathology, but the prison systems, emotional corporations, street gangs fighting, nations of conflict. I mean, there are these large systems that hurt people, and many of us live in many of them at the same time. So I got very interested in that after a couple of decades as a psychologist. So after my doctorate, I went back to school, got another master's degree in organizational development. I trained with 2 internationally known conflict resolution people, and began to work on the systems level, from small nonprofits to IBM. And that, which I thought would be the rest of my life. Hi, join us. Come on in. Oh, terrific. We've got we now have gender diversity and age diversity as well. Okay. So so I got into systems change and thought at the time that was going to be for the rest of my life, but that turned out to be a very short-lived career because I found out about this global governance stuff. And it just became, there are some things you hear about and it's like intuitively obvious. So for me, it was like that. It's like, oh, of course, that's what the world needs. So, so that's kind of my pathway here, and then through the Philippines, and finally getting here. So any quick questions, anything before we start? Okay, great. So let's roll it. So we can go to the M1. Okay. See the screen better. So, oh yeah, so they're seeing me at home here. Okay, so I have to be here and look here at the same time. Okay, well, we'll see how that works. Okay, so, all right. So I'm going to start by talking to you a little bit about some world history that has basically disappeared. At least in the US, it's no longer in the textbooks, it's not taught in the schools. But it's a piece of history. So here we go. So after World War II, there are many people, as you can imagine, talking about how to make sure we never have a World War III. Because with the advent of the atomic bomb and possible nuclear bombs on the way, people were really clear that if there was a World War III, that would be the end of humanity as we know it. And some of you might be familiar with an Einstein quote. I'll paraphrase it. I don't remember the exact quote, but Einstein said something like, I don't know what weapons we'll use for World War III, but World War IV will be fought with sticks and stones. So, so there was a general understanding that we don't want to go there. Okay? So most of those conversations turned into the UN. And if any of you are familiar with the UN and the UN Charter, the very first line in the preamble to the Charter was, we the peoples of the United Nations determined to save succeeding generations from the scourge of war, and then it goes on from there. So that was really the core pillar of the UN, to make sure that we have no more wars. However, as you also probably know, there's been about 250 wars since. Actually, this presentation was put that slide I put together a few years ago. It's probably closer to 300 now. Yeah, didn't count Israel and Palestine, I didn't count Russia, Ukraine, et cetera, et cetera. So clearly, the UN is limited in what it could do. Now, there are people who are UN bashers. I'm not one of them. The UN has done a lot of good. It has prevented some wars. It's shortened others. It's eradicated certain diseases. It's done a lot of good things. However, it's clear when you look at climate change now, when you look at the Israel and Palestine situation, Russia, Ukraine, the limitations are staggering. And I understand one of your government people is also advocating now for UN charter change. You mentioned anyone. So it's clear it's limited. So at the time the UN was formed, there were a number of there was an alternative proposal on the world stage for how to organize the world, how to set up this global governance system. There were many people who advocated for it. Here are just some of them: Einstein, as I mentioned, Gandhi, Eleanor Roosevelt, Truman. By the way, this presentation was made for a U.S. American audience. So I'm going to internationalize it now that I'm speaking more internationally, but you'll see the US version here, and Churchill. So he's not from the US, so there you go. So there was another proposal on the stage, on the world stage, and that was to set up a global democracy. Okay, that's an idea that has come under a number of names. Global democracy, of course, is one of them. The kind of technical official name is World Federation. That's the one we use. The movement that we're involved in is called the World Federalist Movement. Chris's organization here is a member of that. Citizens for Global Solutions, which I was the executive director of, retired from that 2 years ago. Was another member, and now I'm on the board. Now I'm on the board of the International Umbrella Organization. So yeah, so called World Federation, also called World Union and World Republic. So you may hear different names for it. The World Federation is kind of the technical term. Oh, but am I speaking loud enough? You hear me okay? Okay, terrific. I'm from New York originally, so you know we just scream through the traffic and all that stuff. So I never need a mic. Okay, so I'm going to play a 2-minute video clip with some people talking about global democracy. Oh, and by the way, the technical stuff is all the system we haven't used before. So letting you know in advance, we may have a few glitches here and there, but I think we beat the bugs out. So here we go.
Democracy in its purest form, every man and every woman with an equal voice. And I want to see if we can apply this on a worldwide scale. We're told democracy creates stability and raises living standards. So why not for everyone?
Il y a des outils aujourd'hui globales et qui nécessairement et fondamentalement interpellent la réponse globale.
Our sense is that there's a huge democratic deficit in the world today, a huge gap between the world that we have and the world that most people are want.
I think we will create something which has never existed. The first more democratic revolution.
Equalize voice.
We are the democracy and unified and standardized democracy worldwide.
Incluyendo Chile, incluyendo India, incluyendo los países árabes.
Never been done.
This will unfold.
Sometimes the story all the way to no, like that is
This is like that. And therefore they get together and act. They can't do actually from they are equal.
Social problems are related to democracy.
Of the world have absolutely no say in following the honor.
In protection of the environment, education, medicine, healthcare, many problems. The distribution of fuels, all appropriate now, not at the law.
Every factor that you talk
Io mi atrevo a decir que es posible hacerlo en media generación. 12 o 15 años. So I think 10 to 15 years.
What is possible?
Okay, so what would this global democracy look like? And how would it operate? So if, whoever just came in, okay, hi, I'm Bob Flax. I'm the out of town speaker from the US. Okay, so, yeah, hold on a minute, let's get that off of there. Okay, terrific. So, as I said, I'm from California. And anyone ever been to California? Oh, terrific. Okay, so then you know that California has, borders a couple of states. One of them is Arizona, and there is I think it's about a 200-mile boundary of the Colorado River. Okay? And you may know that region of the country is very arid. It's a lot of desert on both sides of the border. So there are very frequent disputes for water in the Colorado River. And some years ago, you probably know that the actor Arnold Schwarzenegger was our governor for a while. They nicknamed him the Governator, so from the Terminator movie. So at one point there was a water shortage in California. So Arnold, in his wisdom, assembled the National Guard to go to the border and to take over the water in the Colorado River. And Janice Brewer, who was the governor of Arizona at the time, not to be outdone, she brought her National Guard over, and they were about to fight it out. Okay? And that was nicknamed the California-Arizona Water Wars. What is that up there? Can we get rid of that? Professional settings. So, thank you. So, technical stuff. So anyhow, so let me ask, has anyone heard of this here? Terrific, you're all right, and you know why? It never happened. I made it up. Okay, but the operative question is, why wouldn't it have happened? Anyone want to venture a guess? They're part of the federal system. Aha! Ding, 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 ding. Yes. So there's something above them. They're part of the federal government, and on that level, rather than duking it out on the battlefield, you go to court. You sue. So there are nonviolent ways to resolve conflicts and resolve disputes. And there is a federal court where it gets brought. And the key there, because there are world courts, but they're not enforceable in the same way they are in a country. They're voluntary at that level. So, but within a country, that's enforceable law. So if Arnold were in a macho mood and did want to do something like that, he would be put in handcuffs and taken off to prison or jail or wherever they would take him. So, so that doesn't happen. So the question is, what if that same idea were brought to the global scale, or global level, rather? So when you and I go to vote, we not only vote for our local mayor, you call them mayors here in cities? Okay, not only vote for our local mayor and representatives, we vote for our state, our state governor and representatives. We vote for national, I know you have a parliamentary system, so there's no president. I'll have to change the wording there when I redo this. But we vote for the national leaders. But you also vote for representatives to the World Parliament at the same time, right there in the voting booth, or however you do it. And at that level, there's a global constitution that will replace the UN Charter, we hope, at one day. There's a global Bill of Rights. Okay? There are the global institutions, the world judiciary, and the other institutions necessary to the global parliament to make law, the judiciary to interpret it, et cetera, et cetera. It's a federal system. The technical term for how it runs is subsidiarity, which means that local problems get solved at the local level. State problems at the state level, national at the national, and global problems at the global level. Okay? There's universal accountability, no one's above the law, and there's individual accountability, which folks are responsible individually, which is very different than international law now. Now, most of international law is state accountability, if there's another technical term for it. So if I'm one country and I don't like another, I can't go in and arrest someone. Now, Trump just did that. But according to international law, you can't do that. You have to embargo the country, you attack it, whatever. So you punish, all the innocent people, the population, where only a handful of leaders make the bad decisions. Okay. So in this global democracy, that would no longer be the case. It'd be individual accountability. People individually get brought to court. Okay. So like the ICC tried to do with Putin, you can, indict someone, but there's no enforcement in the current global system. So where did these ideas come from? Okay. So as you probably remember way back from history class, that the world went through a period of empires, but that's not what we're talking about here. In an empire, usually the king, the royal family, whatever, tries to get their will down all the way, to whatever the population is. So that's not what we're talking about here. Oh, I love it. We have another presentation happening at the same time. That's fine. I may jump into that one later. So okay. So I'm not talking about an empire, but instead, instead these ideas started to form actually centuries ago. Some of the earliest writings, and even go beyond this, but Dante, Dante's Inferno, where he described the levels of hell, basically. So that's what he's most known for, and a few other writings. But he also wrote a book called The Monarch, where he began to conceptualize what a global governance system might look like. Okay? Fast forward some years later, Hugo Grotius, I'm not sure how it's pronounced, the Dutch jurist. As I'm sure you know, the Dutch were one of the early seafaring countries. And Grotius was thinking, well, if there's going to be international trade, you need international law that's enforceable and works around the world. So he began to create it and write that out. And he is known to this day as the father of international law, having started. Go further ahead, Immanuel Kant, famous German philosopher. Again, he's known for many other things, but he also wrote a book called Perpetual Peace. And in that book, he actually sketched out a lot of the structures that some years later became the League of Nations. So these were some of the early ideas looking at how you set up a global governance system. Okay? But things really kind of started cooking, and pardon me, this is the American bias coming in, with the US. Now, actually, Switzerland was going through something similar at the same time when the United the Cantons. So that'll be in my updated version of this. But anyhow, so when the US declared independence, there was and won its independence, there was a period here, about 8 years, where it wasn't yet the United States of America. A lot of people in the US don't even know this. There was a period, these years, where it operated under something called the Articles of Confederation. And what that was basically the 13 colonies that broke away from England were essentially 13 separate nations originally, with a loose agreement. This was the agreement. And that's how they operated for a while and thought that's how they would operate forever. But very quickly, it was clear there were a number of problems. So one set of problems were economic. 7 of the states printed their own currency, so they had difficulty working and trading with each other. We didn't have the bank exchanges that you have today. Different states and countries boycotted products from each other. States imposed taxes and levies and things on each other. So the kind of economic engine that was to become the United States didn't take off during this period at all. In addition, there were actually domestic battles between the states. There were 2,000 settlers from Connecticut that went into Pennsylvania, and the Pennsylvania Army massacred them. So during that period of time. Maryland and Delaware were fighting over rights to fishing in the Potomac River. They call those the Oyster Wars. New York and New Jersey exchanged cannon fire. When they were bringing in textiles, they had to go past the New Jersey ports, but they docked in New York. So New Jersey wanted to collect the taxes, and New York said, no, they're unloading here. And they actually started fighting each other. Now, coming from New York, they're still fighting, I can tell you that. But the different issues. So anyhow, New York, I have not had time to research this one in detail, but New York was massing troops along the Vermont border. So there were actually battles during that period between the different states. Also, in terms of collective security, 9 of the states had their own navies. So when a ship would go out and a Navy ship would go to protect it, the Navy was so small, the pirates would easily knock them off and steal all the goods from the Navy ship and the commercial ship. So the strength of it wasn't good. And the militias were separate and had a hard time coordinating. And so, in other words, things were a mess, very much like they are today. So how it went from that condition to the United States, and again, you probably know at least some of this, is there were some of the what we call the fathers of our country, who wrote a series of essays called the Federalist Papers, where they began to kind of conceptualize this two-level system, where you have the states with their own governments, but there's a federal government over it, so you have both unity and diversity. And and they wrote a series of very influential papers on that. And then there was this fellow who knew a chief from one of the Iroquois tribes. I think there were 9, if I remember correctly, 9 Indian nations, and 2 more joined later, and they were warring for 100 years. And they formed a council above it. And I heard, I haven't double checked this, but I heard that only the women were allowed to vote at that council. That probably helped. So, but someone told me that. I haven't verified that. But anyway, they ended up creating this collective with the 2 levels, and this chief that Franklin knew told him, and he brought those ideas to the party. And voila, you throw it all into the soup and stir, and we have the structure of the United States government and Constitution, where you have the people, the state level, and then the federal level. So, and something similar, different set of circumstances, but something similar was happening in Switzerland at the same time when the cantons were united. Okay. So those were the first 2 federal governments on Earth with this idea of the unity and diversity. Okay. So from there, we fast forward 200 years back to which is the start of the history of this movement, and back to World War II. So originally, as it says on the bottom there, the UN, the purpose of the UN was to abolish war. And when a number of people looked at the structure of the UN, they felt, as I said, that it's not going to work. It's not going to live up to its fullest potential. So at that time, there were a number of people who started this movement. And one of them is this fellow, Gary Davis. Now, he's the only person that someone has made a feature film about. So I'm going to show you the 5-minute trailer for that film. Not to say that he's better than the others or whatever, but the director of the film captured historical, I know very family, he found a lot of historical footage of what was happening at the time that this movement got born. So I want to share that with you so you get a sense of where this all started from. So let's get to, okay. Starts with an Einstein quote.
Every day is a rising Broadway star. The night he stood in the alien Danny Kaye, he brought down the lips, getting 13 curtain calls. Then the world went mad. Families were ripped apart. His brother was killed in action. Gary enlisted, eager to bomb Hitler's war factories. But then he was ordered to bomb a city full of civilians. Horrified at the carnage, he was enraged at the war system. Sure that there must be a better way to run our world, he set off to right the wrongs and prevent World War III. He gave up Broadway and made the whole world his stage. He dared to interrupt the squabbling of nations, to demand that the UN hold worldwide elections of a global congress to outlaw war and make peace. 20,000 war-weary Europeans rallied with him to demand that the world recognize the rights of humanity.
Évidemment choisir entre les difficultés et les massacres de la guerre. Moi, j'ai choisi.
The very next day, the UN unanimously passed the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. With that authority, Gary then staged the most audacious performance of all. He declared a government of, by, and for the people of the world. He gave up his United States citizenship to raise his allegiance to the global family. He became the first official world citizen. His new government issued IDs, marriage licenses, and passports. Nations first rejected them and locked Gary up for failing to have national papers. But amazingly, hundreds of thousands began to register as world citizens. Nations around the globe began to stamp the world passports. Thousands of refugees and detainees, incarcerated for years for lack of identity papers, obtained world passports, and for many, freedom. Gary Davis stands for a world most people can only dream about. A world in which humanity is united. A future in which we free ourselves from the scourge of war and oppression. A world in which we are one. The Gary Davis story.
Let's have this. I gotta get under that. Oh, okay, great. You need a copy? Right. Okay, pardon me, our technical team is working out the details. Okay, so. Great, okay. So then let's move this. Can we move that? No, this thing. Can that go up there where it was? Terrific. Okay, then that'll disappear in a minute. Fabulous. Okay. And by the way, this is Gary Davis at his 90th birthday. I'm hiding behind the crowd there. I designed the birthday cake. So, and he died in 93. This was about 10 years ago or so. So anyhow, so there were many people around the world at the time doing various things. Some were just writing books or lecturing. Other people were out there in public, you know, et cetera, trying to get this movement. Anyone ever heard of this, by the way? Yeah, like I said, well, yeah, of course. Right here. These are the paid shills in the audience, you know. So yeah, and again, I'm showing this to you to give you an idea of the launching of this as a formal movement. So, okay, why is it not advancing? Hold on a moment. Let's first, okay, let's see if that does it. Okay, hold on. Good, okay. So at that time, there were 5 organizations around the world working on this. They united to become the World Federalist Movement, what I'm now on the board of. And 150,000 members at the time. There was a large youth movement around the world. The movie, if we saw the whole, hour-and-a-half movie, it goes into detail about that. There were actually 20 states in the United States where the state legislatures said that they want the country to move toward a world federation. And there were over 30 resolutions that went to the US Congress at the time. Here is one of them. This was a concurrent resolution between the House of Representatives and the Senate. And this is what it said. Resolved by the House of Representatives and the Senate concurring that it is the sense of the Congress that it should be a fundamental objective of the foreign policy of the United States to support and strengthen the United Nations and seek to develop it into a world federation. So it's kind of right there permeating US government. Can we get the cursor out of there? Okay, thank you. Okay, also, these were, again, a handful of the people who came out in support of this. Scientists, religious leaders, politicians, poets, these were all people, the Pope, they were all advocating for this at the time. Anyone see the movie Oppenheimer? Oh, a couple of years ago? Yeah. So yeah, Oppenheimer's on the list. Not only Einstein and Oppenheimer, but most of the Manhattan Project scientists who knew the power of the bomb and what could happen were advocating this as really the only way to avoid nuclear calamity. And in the United States, there were a number of public opinion polling organizations. Roper is one of the big ones, or at least was then. They did a poll of the country. And the poll said if every other country in the world would elect representatives to a World Congress and let all problems between countries be decided by this Congress, with a strict provision that all countries have to abide by the decisions, whether they like them or not, would you be willing to have the United States go along with it? Almost 63% said yes. So what went wrong? I mean, why don't we have a world federation now? Here's what happened. We went into the Cold War. This fellow, junior senator from Wisconsin, McCarthy, Joe McCarthy, he basically started accusing everyone who had any interest in anything foreign as being a communist. I have professors who are, older and have since retired, who lost their jobs at the time. They were interested in international affairs and things like this. People got scared. The movement contracted. And in my organization, decades ago, during this time, was actually put on a list of, what it was called the Un-American Activities List or something. So, so the momentum just stopped. It stopped dead, and as I said, contracted. But fast forward, 1989, the Berlin Wall comes down. So at least at the time, the thought is that's the end of communism. We won the battle. The West won the battle. But whereas the movement was about ending war, initially, that's how it started as part of the peace movement. By now, the world had changed. So most major systems now have gotten globalized by this point. The communications, transportation, food, the economy, agriculture. So this is all global. And also most of the world's problems have globalized, whether it's, terrorism, climate change, et cetera, et cetera. The only thing that hasn't gone global is democracy. And our fundamental tenet is that that's the cause of these problems. That the problems have gotten global, but we don't have the global governance system that's capable of management. That's what so all of the things, when you look at climate change, and look at this and look at that we view those as symptoms of a world that's governing itself incorrectly, in a sense. So how would this work? That's one of the main questions. What would it look like? How would it work? The truthful answer is nobody knows. It's not up and running yet. There's no, one constitution that's been adopted, but there's a fair amount of consensus among the people that have been thinking about this and working on it. So one thought is this would be a parliamentary system. So we're familiar with that, and it would have the basic branches of government that we have. Those seem to be viable. There would be some way of voting. There are a number, as I said, of different proposals. This is a voting scheme from one of them. So there are many, many others. This divides the world up into voting regions. So places that are less populated, as you see, are much larger, and places like China that are very, heavily populated are broken up more. So they're relatively equal, but there are various other schemas as well. This is one structure for a world parliament. Again, different proposals, but folks have been thinking about this and working it out. And then the next question, of course, is how would we get there? What are the different paths? In the literature, since 1947, there have been four main paths that have been outlined of how to go. And there are organizations right now working on each of these. So most people feel, okay, the UN is not perfect. It's got all kinds of problems, but it's what we have. We have to start there. So most of the people are all the way on the left in terms of transforming the UN. That's now. It would probably be done by what's called a charter review, when they basically change the country-centered representatives. They take about a 2-year process and change the charter into a world constitution. And that's in one proposal, and there are different organizations coming at that differently. But there are other people who feel that the UN is such a bureaucratic morass, it's so hopelessly broken, there's no way you're going to make any progress there. We have to work outside of the UN. And those people tend to fall into these three other camps, if you will. One group says, well, wait a minute, this is kind of happening naturally. You have the US already integrated years ago. The EU is the most advanced one right now. There's the African Union, I forgot what the South American unions, but there are federations forming. So what you've got to do is support them. And that's step one, to have the various regional federations. And then all you have to do is connect the dots. And then you have a world federation. So there are a number of people taking that angle. In probably the leading group is in Argentina right now. There's a parliament minister in Argentina, it's Fernando, who is working on that angle, basically, and has some very creative ways that he's going about that. Then in other ways, United Democracies, that's what Chris and the local organizations work on. That was originally proposed right before World War II. A fellow named Clarence Strite, who was a journalist who was assigned, I forgot what newspaper, but he was assigned to cover the League of Nations, and he saw how that collapsed. So he felt that if we're going to, and he saw, the rising tide of Nazism and all that, so he felt to prevent that, we need to take the most advanced democracies, turn them into a federation, and Hitler wouldn't dare attack. If there was kind of a super nation, and then just Hitler would appear. So that never happened. Hitler attacked, the rest. Okay, so that's still out there, and then there are a number of different ideas on how to unite the democracies. And Chris will actually be talking about that in the afternoon. That's what the local organization is working on. The last is people feel, well, let's write the Constitution. And actually, there've been over 200 constitutions written for the earth, actually. But there's only one group, the World Constitution and Parliament Association, that has written it, and they're now knocking on doors of different countries to see if they will adopt it and join up. They've gotten a fair amount of interest, actually probably the most in India right now. And I should say India is one of, I think, 27 countries that in their constitution, it says, Gandhi and Nehru very much for this, in their constitution, and I'm paraphrasing, it basically says, if there is a global thing, we're going to join. So it's already there. There are a number of countries that already have that built in. So again, part of history that most people don't know. So that's the fourth path, if you will. And in the afternoon, as I said, Chris will be talking about that more. So what are the benefits of this? So obviously, rather than taking, if we have the United States of the world, instead of taking conflicts out to the battlefield, you take them to court, you sue, and then let the court make the decision, and the decisions are binding, they're enforceable. That's the difference from what we have now. In terms of, and this is dated, as you see, I've got to update this. It's much worse now. But this was the US budget, back in 2021. Now with Trump kind of cutting a lot of things here, it's far worse. And with other nations militarizing war, it's going to move more in this direction where human services have to be sacrificed. All right, well, okay. You're here for the thrilling conclusion, at least of the morning. Okay. So, okay. And then in terms of the environment, instead of mowing down yet another rainforest or polluting yet another ocean or making the air so dirty you can't breathe, what if there was a global environmental protection agency? Again, there kind of is now in the UN, but it has no teeth. It's all voluntary. Okay? And what if there was a referendum? The people of the world voted and said, well, we want no more than 350 parts per billion CO2 in the year. And then the legislation has to be written and enforced. So you'd have the power of what countries have, but you have it on a global level. Oh, and economically, and I'm not an economist, so I fall short on explaining, but it's been explained to me that the economy could be more stable in this kind of situation than what we have now. Okay. And human rights can be enforced, and in a more powerful way than is done now. As we know, some countries do better, some do worse. So this would be at a global level. Okay. So in terms of what we've accomplished since 1947 when we were founded, there were a number of things we focused on. The decision was made along the way, rather than, and this was decades ago, rather than push directly for a world federation. We should do a lot of incremental steps and kind of build the institutions and build the treaties and all. So those were strategic decisions made in the past. So this is some of what we've done. Probably the key thing, the thing I'm most well known for, is back in the 90s, the idea started earlier, is the World Federalist Movement and other NGOs created a coalition that brought together the 120 nations that signed the Rome Statutes that created the International Criminal Court. So we did that. So that's the biggest thing that we're known for. In addition to that, there are a number of treaties that we've supported. If you see, this is kind of chronological. So the ones at the beginning were more about war and weaponry and things like that. As you go further down, there's the UN Convention for the Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination Against Women. We supported that. It got rejected by enough nations that it didn't pass. We'll be pushing on that, the UN Convention for the Rights of the Child, et cetera, et cetera. So these are some of the things. Some of these did get passed, the treaties got approved, and some did not. Okay. We also worked on a number of initiatives. I won't take the time to go through each individually, but these are some of the things we've done since the 1947. And we've also worked on democratizing the UN more. So, for example, the Secretary General of the UN used to be selected through kind of backroom deals, and mostly the US pushed who they wanted. So we had what's called the 1 for 7 billion campaign that made it much more transparent and democratized it more, and different people who wanted to do it made presentations, and it was a more open process, which ended up with Gutierrez, the current Secretary General. So we've been working on making the UN more transparent and democratizing that. Okay. So at this point, if you're interested, both the global level as well as the local level are nonprofits. Do you call them nonprofits here? Okay, terrific. So I think you've translated. So in Thailand, in Malaysia, and Singapore, you know, all the other places, I had to get translators for all this. So yeah, so if you're interested in getting involved, whether you're a good writer, whether you're a good fundraiser, you know, researcher, campaigner, we can use help like any nonprofit. So we welcome that if you're interested. Okay. And I'll leave you with another quote by Einstein. There is no salvation for civilization or even the human race other than the creation of a world government. So with that, I will take questions. Oh, let me just point out. So this is the website for the World Federalist Movement, the global umbrella. This is for the U.S. organization. Like I said, this is a U.S. presentation, but this is the local. So you can get that there. And Luis, as I understand, will be sending an email out to give folks information afterward. So yes, so floor is open for questions. Let's see how many we have. About a half hour. About a half hour. Okay, terrific. So first I'll take questions from our live audience, and well, I guess they're live at home too, but they're the audience inside was the cyber. So questions, couple comments, or whatever. Yes.
What do you think is the main inhibiting factor for that inhibits the advancement of the world?
Yeah. If you asked me that question a year ago, I would have given a different answer than I would now. So I'll give you both answers. I'll give you the year ago answer, and I'll give you the now answer. Throughout the decades, the main fear. So this is the year ago answer. The main fear was somehow this could become a global tyranny. Now, most people didn't understand it. They were thinking empire. They were thinking, oh, you have a king, or you have someone running the thing, as opposed to a democratic, you know, system and subsidiarity and all that. So that was the main fear, that somehow this, you know, I remember reading one comment where someone said, "Oh, you mean someone in Brussels is going to tell me what I can have for breakfast?" You know, so that was the fear, that this would become a global tyranny in some form. And we'll say what you can do and not do. So yeah, because up until about a year ago, when I gave presentations, that's the first thing. That's the first question you think. What prevents this from being a global tyranny? I will say that there is so many more. You use the phrase checks and balances in Australia. Terrific. Okay, I love this here, and I'll leave. So there's so many more checks and balances. And in, you know, in most countries, there's so much of the government that isn't transparent because of national security. You know, you can't let people into meetings because you don't want the other country to find out. But there is no other country here. So things could be much more transparent. The media is in on every meeting, and well, who you're hiding from, you know. So there are many more checks and balances. There's much more transparency. So, and I'll just throw out one other proposal is that instead of a single president or prime minister, in fact, I think the one that I put up there has what they call a presidium. You have a representative from each continent, if I remember correctly, and they rotate every year. And then when the continents, except I don't think Antarctica, then you get a new group. So there's just much more built in, so it doesn't become a global tyranny. So that is my old answer. Okay, of what was preventing the people's fear that, oh, and folks not wanting to lose power, you know, because if you have something above you, then you know the folks empowering the nations, you know, don't have the same level of power. The reason I would say now, and I mean, this comes up in our conference calls all the time, where we're really looking at how to deal with this, is, as you probably know, the world has gone through swings where we've had periods of democratization, and there's been periods of autocratization. We're in one of those now. You know, where countries, you know, on the forgetting the organization right now that rates the Freedom Project, I think, that rates you know, democracies, and a lot of democracies are sliding, you know, in the autocracy direction. So right now, there's a stronger headwind to do this. So Chris had his path has a way to deal with that. And that's what we'll talk about in the afternoon. Does that speak to your?
Yes, thank you.
Terrific. Other questions? The ice is already broken, so yes, please.
Constitution, because like the country constitution is already hard to enforce.
Mhm.
How do we enforce world constitutions?
Right. Well, I mean, there are a number. How would I see? If you remember that pie chart with all the money that went into the military, okay? If you don't need that because we're not fighting each other, we're the same country, and all that money is redirected. First of all, you meet human needs much, much better. All of those things get funded. And second of all, you can fund the mechanisms to enforce law better. So that's the first response I would give. Yeah. So let me hold it there for right now. I mean, you would be able to fund whatever structures are necessary for enforcement. Better. Thank you. Other questions that I either can or cannot answer? Yes.
What specific mechanism or incentives would you propose for non-Western democracies like India, South Africa to join? And how would you address the perception of?
Yeah, great question. So I probably should repeat the question so people hear at home. So it's what incentives would we give for other countries to join? And you gave India.
Non-Western.
Yeah, non-Western countries. Yeah. Of course, to a degree, it has to meet the needs of that specific country. But in general, what I would say is it took World War I to create the League of Nations. It took World War II to create the United Nations. We were hoping, the World Federalism was hoping, I would say we were optimistic. We thought that we could head off World War III or now an global ecological crisis or something like that. And people would understand the benefits of this, as I said. So we're not that sure either. It's quite possible that things are going to get worse before they get better. Both, I mean, whether it's war, global violence, whether it's the environment, I think it's pretty much baked in at this point, the environment. So the main incentive is, the main one is the insight that if we keep going the way we're going, it's just going to go downhill. That's the main incentive, that people see that if we come into some type of coalition, we can get out of this problem. That's the main incentive. Then, depending on what the individual needs of the nation are, I assume, because I'm probably not going to be part of the committee that writes the Constitution there, but I assume they'll be then targeted. One nation may need more development assistance. One nation, may have, sea level rise and may need to evacuate. So I assume that if there is some world system, just like, in Australia, if you have flooding in one region and fires in another, the federal government is dealing with it differently, giving different assistance to it. I assume that'll happen on the global level too. But I'm probably not going to be in that committee. I won't live that long. But, just a point on that. Yeah. The EU has sort of met this one. So they have a principle that all the member nations should be brought up to the same level of development standard of living. So they allocate funds to the poorer countries to bring them up to standard. And that's a major incentive for new countries to join. So I think. Yeah, no, thank you. That has been discussed. I just didn't remember it. So yes.
But can we say today online what Chris just said?
Oh yes, what Chris said was that the EU has a agreement that all countries would be brought up to the same level. So assessing what the needs are in those countries, they can provide the kind of assistance they need to bring them up to the standard level of the other European nations. Thank you. Okay, yes, and then I'll get back to you.
So my question is, whether it's at the individual level or the level of nations, often fear is a very big driving factor in becoming insular or very sort of internally focused to the exclusion or to the detriment of other, whether it's other countries or other people. And what I've heard has been great. I love it. But I'm just wondering, beyond sort of optimistic thinking and this idea that people will see the light, the fact that it's obviously smarter to do things in a way where it's federation and whatnot. Do you have any ideas about how to help break down this fear, which is one of humanity's oldest emotions and driving factors?
Right, yeah.
But can you repeat?
Oh, yes, thank you. So the question is, with every situation, fear comes up. And if there are threats, people tend to be insular or just stay with their family or their clan or their tribe or whatever, and not expand to build these kinds of coalitions, which may be beneficial. So yeah, what's interesting, because as a psychologist, I'm also in touch with other psychologists who are involved in this, and this is something we talk about a lot. Probably, and this is, I guess I'm reluctant to talk in these terms because in my mind it cheapens it a little bit, but probably a number of people, psychologists, marketing people and all that, will deal with that and look at how do we do the messaging that's convincing. So, because that's what you have to do. You have to, influence attitudes and change behavior. I know, and this is kind of behind the scenes, in Aristotle, he laid out certain principles and said, if you want to have a persuasive conversation, you need to appeal to the intellect, you need to appeal to authority, and you need to appeal to emotions. So whenever I make a presentation, I try the intellect, I got the facts, I try the authority, I got Einstein, and I try to connect emotionally as well. So I'm imagining that whoever is planning the messaging on this will be doing something similar. I mean, I'm not sure how else to go at it, but no, it's a great question. Yeah.
Thanks.
Thanks very much for the presentation. Would you be able to give us, sorry if it's a straightforward question, but would you be able to give us some indication of the size of this World Federalist movement, both in terms of numbers of people and reach?
Sure.
And time.
Yeah. So
Bob,
there's the umbrella.
Bob, can you?
Oh, I'm sorry. Yes, thank you. That's not the constant reminder. So the question is the size of the World Federalist movement at the moment. So it's expanded and contracted at different times, as I showed before. At the moment, and we do have, a few people who are part of the organization monitoring this. So I'm not in that group. So this is a guesstimate. I think at the moment we have roughly 50 member organizations. They 50. We have different levels of membership, but I think they're in the ballpark of 50. You think
we have 46 members.
46 member organizations. Oh, there you go. So 46 member organizations.
Yes.
Now they vary from small 2 or 3 people to I think the largest right now is it Japan or Italy?
Union of UEF, Union of European Federation.
And how large are they?
They have thousands.
8,000 or thousands?
Thousands. Yeah. I don't know off the top of my head.
Yeah. I think, that's right. Yeah, that was so big. They split. They have the Young European Federalists, I think it was like 42,000, and the adults were roughly the same. So there's a wide variance. So I don't know the bottom line tally. I don't have.
But is the Pope still involved? Is the Pope still?
Well, this was a previous Pope, but I don't know that I don't know anything about if the latest Pope knows about this. The last Pope, Francis, he knows the fellow in Argentina, the parliament minister who's Runnington is there, and they were trying to get a statement from him. But if you know from Pope Francis, he was very much in favor of things of this sort. But I don't think we ever got a statement. Yeah, the religion currently that's the most out front about this is the Baha'i faith. in their scriptures, it actually talks about a world federation, and they set up their religious structure around the world as a world federation. It's set up this way. And a number of Baha'i have been on our board and working at the UN, hosting our organization. They're the most out of the box. I'm working on a website right now, or a web page to go on a site with like a dozen religions and what they say about this, and statements they've made either recently or in the past. So I could say that there has been religious support for this all along. Yes.
Thank you very much
Thank you.
for your presentation as well. I have
Well-
lots of things and it's not super clear in my mind, but I'll try to have two questions that make sense, if that's okay.
Two for the price of one, go ahead.
I think there's two questions in my mind. Is this the right model, ideal model? And the other one is, what's the pathway to get there? And is there a pathway to get to that point? The question on the right model, I'm wondering about the limitations of this model. And I know there are alternative models like the nonviolent global liberation model, for example, which is needs-based as well. We can see our current federations, and that's the case in Australia, not working and not delivering the things to the people that are elected democratically. So how would we expect such a model to work? And we're thinking about a federation of almost states, but at the moment we know that the most powerful actors, and I think a lot of this is about power and how is power shared. At the moment, transnational corporations, those giant corporations, the Googles and the, those giant tech companies and others, they are the ones who are yielding the powers even more than our federal governments that have really not that much power if we look at it. So how would, what are the limitations of that model? And the other one is, maybe I'll just leave it at that one.
All right, well, let me start there, and then we can, I'm fine with more than one question per person, but I want to make sure that everyone gets their first question in if they want to. But let's go right to Google.
Can you try to summarize?
Oh, yeah. Oh, summarize it. So I guess the first point was many governments are not working well now. So why would a global government be any better? And the second is aside from the governments, a lot of the multinational corporations are really where the money and the power lies, and we can't regulate those. So how do you handle those on a global scale? Okay. So let me start with the movements in the world. So once upon a time, and again, it may be different countries, but in the US.
Sorry, just one thing. It's not about how do we regulate multinationals.
Yeah.
It's the power is not with governments. It doesn't make sense to have a federation of governments.
Right. Well, let me explain. The once upon a time, governments were here and corporations were here. So at least in the US, if folks wanted to form a corporation, they would knock on the door of the government. They would fill out the papers and all that stuff. And if they were approved, it would then be granted, and then they would do their thing. And as long as they were good actors, they continued to do the thing. Okay? If they were bad actors, if they were doing things that hurt people, cheated people, whatever, the governments would pull the plug and then they would die. They would take their charter away. And the slang for that is the corporate death sentence. At least that's what we call it in the United States. The problem now, as you're rightfully saying, is now the corporations are here. Okay, so if they don't like what's happening in the local government, all right, great, they'll get child labor here, they'll pollute there, they'll do whatever there because they're now here. Okay, so it's probably unlikely that we're going to put the genie back in the bottle. That's probably not going to happen. So the only solution that we see is taking the people, the government, and putting this here. And then having things back in balance again. That's the idea here. So instead of countries going to weak, instead of companies going to weak countries that they're stronger than, they now have to get their charter to operate from the global government. And then they could pull the plug, and if they're not being good actors. So that is our solution for that. I know you're thinking, that's okay. that's the answer that we have. Yeah. So, and yeah, so let me hold it there for a moment, get other first questions, and then if you got a second one formulated, we'll get that, as long as we can do it within 14 more minutes. Okay, and were there any other first questions from anyone? Okay, oh, I want to turn to, are there any questions that came in from cyberspace? No. Okay, terrific. They're having a lunch break and we don't see them. Okay. Any other first questions? Okay, open for second questions, if there are. Yes.
I
And then I'll
have
get you.
just have a comment.
Okay, we take that.
Chris, yeah, because Chris mentioned earlier about like EU. Also want to notice something that before the country able to join EU, they have to meet a limited certain standards to join EU, like including economic and certain like political system also. So until they reach that point that they can join EU and they never be like equal. They try to lift everyone up like equal, but it's not from like the bottom. And
Right, that's correct. And there, as I said, there are oh yes, I'm sorry. So so the statement was that to join, that you just can't join the EU. You have to meet certain criteria and then you can join, and then the EU could help you lift up your standards to the other nations. Okay, that was the question and answer. Okay, so yes, and what I was going to just speaking to that is that there are various proposals, out there, and some of them do have that element in it. Most of them do say it has to be a democracy, and have a few other criteria, and then you can join, because this is a global democracy. So, but yeah, but I don't know the specific requirements that each proposal have. I don't remember them at the moment. Okay, thank you. Yes.
I've got a two-part question.
Oh my God. Okay. Hey, let's see. I'm from New York.
Okay. First part is how do we convince autocracy to give up control and give control to their citizens through a democratic framework? And the second part is how do we best empower people in autocracies that support democracy, either at national or global level, when journalists, politicians, and democracy supporters are jailed, victimized, or killed?
Great question.
Bob, can
Oh, I'm sorry.
sorry.
Yes. So the question is, how do we convince autocracies to become a democracy, and how do we support individuals in those countries, who want democracy when they're killed or jailed or things of that sort? Okay. So again, there's a spectrum of answers to that within the movement. Some folks, but initially the optimistic thinking back then is everyone's going to see everyone's going to be enlightened and jump in all together. So there's no convincing necessary. So obviously that's not happening. So the thinking about that now varies from, and I think probably the prevailing thought is proceed with those countries that want to, just like, well, let's take the Soviet Union as an example, that the West did not have to, even though we had radio free Europe, we had ways to give information into the Soviet Union, but we were not actively trying to convince their leaders you've got to be democratic, Instead, the democracies were developing and doing their thing. The people on the inside of those systems saw that they have a much better standard of living than us. So they started wanting to get, some of them were escaping, going over the wall, doing various things. But it ended up crumbling on its own. And I think most of the thinking right now is to allow them to do what they do and just show that that our system works better. And whether they crumble, whether people overthrow them or outvote them or whatever, that's what's done in those countries.
With the exception of China, because they're
Well, I mean, China, as it's developing right now, is a kind of a new entity for us to think through. On this, if you have some thoughts about that, if you want to throw them in.
There's no way of forcing them. Still the hope is that as they become more wealthy and they reach high standards of living, the citizens will demand democracy for themselves. So, you know,
When they do that, they're jailed.
well, for the time being, they are. But,
Yeah. Yeah, I don't know what's gonna, I mean, we know what it is now with the current leader. And we don't know what's gonna be in 50 years or 100 years, or when the youth takes leadership positions. This is not, someone once gave the metaphor that I think some of the cathedrals in Europe took like 600 years to build, or, you know, more than that. And the architects who designed it and the people who laid the foundation knew they were not going to be alive when it was done, but they did anyway because it was worth it, and or they believed in it. And we're very much in that position. That I mean, decades ago we were optimistic and thought we would see it. Now we might not, but we you know, want to lay the foundations and move toward that, and hope that the world, you know, that those nations catch on. Got time for one more question. Don't need to have it, but okay, terrific.
Just a good question about the spiritual values that humanity needs to live in, like justice. At the moment, we don't have justice around the world. Because, for example, 80% of resources around the world is being used by 20%.
Yep.
And how can we convince people at the grassroots to believe in that justice and bring that justice into being? Unless that justice is in place, global democracy won't be in place.
Yeah, no, that's a great question. But before I mentioned that one of the
can you?
Oh, I'm sorry. Yes. So around the world, there are different cultures, different values, different belief systems. There's overuse of resources in some countries, depriving other countries of those resources. There are different religious beliefs. I mean, we could expand this. There are different beliefs in terms of male-female, you know, equality and not. I mean, there's a whole host of different cultural values. And how do you bring that together under one umbrella? So that's the question. So what I would say, and this is going to open up a can of worms without having time to seal it up, but there were actually historically, over the decades, there has been three main criticisms, I guess, or concerns about a world federation. The first, the biggest one I mentioned, it become a global tyranny. Okay? The second one is if you look at global organizations like the UN, it's such a bureaucratic, morass that you're going to build something bigger. I mean, how is that going to work? You know, so that was the second critique. Third is what you raised, that there are so many different cultural values and things. How could you ever unite them? So let me say a couple of things about that. One is, again, remember, this is a system where local things get handled locally, nationally, international, like that. So a lot of countries will still be able to do what they do, at least initially. That that if a country has equality, then it will continue to. Okay? If a country, I mean, these are things we have to work out. If a country doesn't, then we need to think that through. I mean, we haven't handled everything. But the main, okay, I have three answers at the same time going through. I'm trying to sort through. One of the main issue, addressing your issue about the money. Okay, once that military chunk is no longer necessary and goes over here, we will be able to do miracles. So so there is not as much worry about resource things. Right now, all the resources are being diverted into keeping my country safe, from your country, and vice versa. So all that money, all that energy, all the scientists designing missile guidance systems. I mean, one of the proposals in this is not only is war made illegal, but the people who design, I mean, the designing of weapons and all that, I mean, this is a stretch, but one of the proposals has it, that all of that gets criminalized. That behavior, designing war instruments and things of that sort, that's no longer legal. You can't do that. So all those scientists who are working on that now get to work on meeting human needs, on doing things for people rather than annihilating people. So there's a tremendous shift of resources. So that part is not as much, you know, a problem, at least as far as I see. But going into religious issues and, you know, male, female, those kinds of personal things, that will have to be worked out. And yeah, I mean, most likely there'll be a lot of churning. I mean, things will be stirred up in those areas. And people in countries where they're forced, where women are not allowed to drive, for example, will probably feel empowered to rebel more and sue if they in the global courts if they're not getting their rights. So there'll be a lot of redistribution of those kinds of things. I wish I could give a more complete answer, but no, that's a biggie. And that's a great one to end on because I don't have the answer. So I want to thank all of you for joining us. I hope you, I imagine you learned a few new things. I guess you did because I guess raise your hand if you heard of this or that. And I hope this was interesting, and I hope it got you motivated to perhaps even look into it further. So with that, I'll turn it over to who's going to set up the break and talk about restaurants and all.
Yes. Okay. So we've been recommend to you there's a dining area, a restaurant down in the Australian National Museum, which is 5 or 10 minutes walk down the road. We can all go as a group if you like. Those of you who want to zip off on their own, feel free. That's the next one. So we'll go down there and reconvene those of you who want to 2 o'clock to discuss further pathways to global democracy.
Yeah, so just to say the format is Chris will be presenting next and take his questions after, and then I'll join him and we'll both be here for Q&A and discussion until the ending time. So that's what we'll do this afternoon. No, my father used to say at times like this, don't applaud, just throw money. Yeah, and please not coins because it hurts. Okay.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, I'm not sure we're all quite here yet, but 2:05 maybe we should begin. Thank you for rejoining us, and I hope you've had an entertaining and instructive morning. So we've got a fantastic presentation from Bob. I haven't seen it myself before, so that's great. All right, so this afternoon my topic, or our topic, was basically pathways to a global democracy, or if you like, a democratic world federation. I'll be speaking on behalf, I'm actually president of the Coalition for a World Security Community of Democratic Nations. And this is a transnational working group, about 40 to 50 members. It was actually formed at a meeting of the Global Challenges Foundation in Sweden in 2018. And that's a private foundation formed by a wealthy individual who's concerned about global challenges, obviously, and how to deal with them. And they gave us a start. So international groups met and formed this ongoing group, and we were funded to attend the Paris Peace Forum the next year. Whoops, what happened? Yes. Well, the long-term goal is much the same as Bob was saying. We need a global democracy, if you like, a democratic world federation, to deal with critical global problems confronting us all in common. And I guess Bob ran through them. There's climate change, there's a threat of nuclear holocaust, there's war, destruction, there's, I think, 120 million refugees or displaced persons around the planet. You can go on and on. But it's been obvious to me, maybe the next slide, ever since I can remember, we have these levels of government, as Bob said. We have local government dealing with local needs and problems. We have state government dealing with state needs and problems. We have national governments dealing with national needs and problems. We're beginning to see the emergence of regional governments dealing with regional needs and problems. And obviously, at the top level, we need a global government to deal with global needs and problems. So, as a physicist myself, I'm in full agreement with Albert Einstein. In my opinion, the only salvation for civilization and the human race lies in the creation of a world government with security of nations founded upon law. Bob showed this. So that most people would agree. I find it hard to conceive how you could disagree with it. But the question is, the big question is, how do we get there? And it's an enormously difficult problem. The basic principles of a world government should include universality, so it's particularly on global problems, it has to involve all levels of the earth. But the second major principle has to be democracy. Otherwise, as Bob mentioned, we're in danger of a world tyranny or a world autocracy, which would be, the worst outcome imaginable. So to prevent that, we need a fully functional global democracy. And
sorry, Chris. Something happened.
Okay. So they're not compatible at present, and that's the main obstacle. So we can't do that immediately. We have the need, but it's not possible at present. So what do we do? Bob's run through the different avenues or pathways. Transforming the United Nations is the most obvious one. It's the one the World Federalist Movement is concentrated on. Integrate the regions is far in the future. It's a possibility, but not much we can do. Create a world constitution. The real enthusiasts say, let's do it tomorrow. But that's not possible because of this contradiction. So, in my view, this is the most possible path. If democracy is going to be a basic foundation, then let's start by uniting with democracy, as Clarence Strait said before World War II. And Europe, it seems to me, has set us the example. 1935, World War II was the fifth major war between France and Germany in 200 years, and European leaders decided enough was enough. We have to stop this happening again. And they recognized that integration was the only way to do it. So, in particular, Jean Monnet and his collaborators hit upon a strategy. Start with a smaller group of progressive states or states that are leading in areas of government, namely the original 6 members, and establish not a federation in one step, but a limited community with smaller aims. And in this case, it was the European Coal and Steel Community, designed to integrate the sinews of war, and then wait for the system to evolve or expand, or both, through a series of treaties. The Treaty of Paris founded, I think, the Treaty of Rome, set up the EEC. Maastricht Treaty set up the European Union. And and set up the European Parliament. They haven't done the full thing. They haven't yet reached the European Federation. It's on the agenda. I think it's far enough on to ensure there will never again be a war between France and Germany, at least. It's hard to imagine that. All right, I should say, Jean Monnet formed at the beginning an action committee for the United States of Europe. So that announced that was the European Federation of the United States was his objective from the beginning. All right, can we do something similar at the global level? Where to start? Who should be the original members? Well, since democracy has to be an essential principle, let's start with the initial group that should be democracies. And Bob's already mentioned that idea was already formulated by Clarence Strait in 1949. No, 1939, I'm sorry, before. So it allows a similar route to Europe. Start with a smaller group, evolve step by step, decade by decade, by a series of successive treaties until we reach a true global parliament, the peak body of a global government. And there's no charter standing way. So Bob mentioned the UN Charter needs review, but that's very difficult because it needs the agreement of all five P5 members, permanent members of the UN, including 2 autocracies. And it's most unlikely to happen. In fact, it's never been seriously proposed, although the Charter provides for that in Article 1 and 9. So we want to set up a community of democratic nations. Next question, what should be the basics? What should be the purpose of the community? Well, our group says we need a global security community. Peace and security, well, it was the founding need in Europe, we remind ourselves. And we've seen this present struggle going on between democracy and autocracy. And democracy has been going backward since 2005, 20 years, according to Freedom House. And recently, it's got much worse. We've seen Russia launch an actual invasion of Ukraine, and China has threatened to overtake Taiwan by force if necessary. And President Xi promised to do it by 2048 publicly, but he's going to try much earlier than that. For instance, when he's in power, as soon as they're ready. And experts, such as the ex-chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff in the US, says they'll be ready by 2027, in 2 years' time. So that's what I'm afraid of, because if the US, as they vowed they would do, step in to defend Taiwan, we could easily see ourselves embroiled in World War III. And that, as Bob said, could lead back to the destruction of civilization. Next war might be carried out with sticks and stones. So I think everybody would agree we need to do everything possible to deter China from any such course of action if we can, put them off from starting World War III. I hope you'd all agree with that. How can we do that? Well, the best way would be to form a global alliance of democracy, which they wouldn't dare to challenge, if you like. And so that's what the proposed basis of our world security community would be. It would basically be an alliance of democracies, and it should involve, well, the main Western ones, and include Indo-Pacific nations like Japan, Australia and South Korea. So this is all I'm thinking. I'll invite questions at the end. Possible starting points. Well, we've been, our initial idea was let's expand NATO to include democracies in the Indo-Pacific, such as Australia and South Korea. And that was actually proposed, I believe, by Jens Stoltenberg, who was the Secretary General a few years ago. But I believe it was shot down immediately by France and Germany at the time, saying, let's stick to our knitting with the fit for Europe. And it would be shot down most likely by Hungary and Slovakia, because they're both pro-Russian countries. Well, then, for the last few years, we've been working on an idea of expanding the G7 to a D10. The G7 is a group of 7 major democracies, Western democracies. The idea was to expand that by including members in the Indo-Pacific. Australia and South Korea already includes Japan, I guess. And that idea was advocated by outfits such as the Atlantic Council in the US and the Alliance of Democracies Foundation in Denmark. But it's been trampled on the recent summit, the summit of the G7 this year. Donald Trump turned up. He said it was a pity that Russia still wasn't a member. And he said the US wouldn't agree to any new agreements and walked out a day early. So there was no resulting communique from the G7. And Donald Trump was not going to enter any new multilateral community. So we've had to give up that idea for the moment. But this year, this new possibility has emerged. A new group called the Coalition of the Willing, I don't know if everybody's heard about this in the news, has been formed with France and the UK as leading members. They've set up alternative headquarters in London and Paris. Their main purpose is to aid Ukraine in its struggle against Russia. So they formed a supply chain. It's not a military alliance as such, but it's close. It's a supply chain of military equipment for Ukraine and for financial help. It includes, I forget, is it 31 members? It includes most members of NATO, but not Hungary, Slovakia, or the US, who would be problematic members anyway. It includes most members of the EU, but not Hungary or Slovakia. The question is whether they'd be willing to formalise that grouping of countries into a formal alliance. Australia, I should say, is already a member, but not, I believe, South Korea. Would they be willing to formalise the thing by following Europe, set up a commission, draw up a treaty over a year or so, offer it to the members for signing, and then it would become a formal alliance, hopefully. So that's actually my idea. We haven't got full agreement within our little working group as yet, but I don't know if there are any alternative ideas. Well, there is a global climate community was advocated, but and that was on the table 20 years ago, advocated by Chris Layton. But it's apparently that idea is now collapsed. So that's where we're thinking. Yes. Yes, I may as well. I guess we've got time, have we? I'll add a little bit about the world security community. How would we do it? Well, this was the earlier idea, I suppose, based upon NATO. So let's say replace NATO by the Coalition of the Willing. Refocus its mission as the global security and peacekeeping arm of its members. It should be open to democracies around the globe, so subject to suitable criteria, as in Europe. Introduce a weighted voting system, so there'll be countries of all different sizes, so we need a qualified majority voting system to sort of equalise the outcomes, as in Europe. So it would maintain the security of its members. It could be involved with the UN in maintaining security outside its membership, but only if the Security Council agrees. So in that way, it could form a very useful adjunct to the UN in maintaining peace and security in the wider world. I was mentioning this, so an incentive for more democracies to join would be if you include the principle of solidarity. So all member states should be coming up to the same level of development or standard of living, and there should be funds allocated to bring the less developed ones up to scratch. And that should form a major incentive for other democracies around the globe, like India or South Africa, as we mentioned, to join up. It should include a court to adjudicate disputes between members and form the basis of an eventual judicial system. It should include an assembly of parliamentarians from member states to form the basis of an eventual parliament. Both of those features were included in the EU example. And well, an assembly already exists. So that would be the basic procedure for setting up. And the advantages, just to summarise, it could evolve over time. It would take decades, no doubt, as new members are admitted and as the need gets more obvious, into a democratic world federation. Meanwhile, should provide a virtually ironclad guarantee of security for its members. So once again, it's peace and security is the basic problem principle. It would enable them to share their resources and responsibility for, as I say, taking on peacekeeping or peace building operations in the wider world in the meantime. It would cure dysfunctional decision making. So NATO requires unanimity, consensus among its members to make major decisions, which means on many major matters, no decision is reached. Whereas with a qualified majority voting system, some sort of decision is possible. It would provide this new legal framework. So members of the community would be required to settle disputes among themselves by referring it to the court. It would give the COW, the Coalition of the Willing, and well, very important mission. The OECD might become part of the organisation right away. I think it's basically made up of democracies. Complementary the UN, it would make the UN much stronger in terms of peacekeeping, peace building missions. I've already mentioned structural adjustment funds under the principle of solidarity will attract new members. And well, this is an old statement. There were previously calls from both sides of politics in the US for a League of Democracies or a Consulate of Democracies, e.g. the Strike Council in the US. So it should have good chance of it being accepted there, modulo, of course, Donald Trump. All right, that's my presentation. I don't know if there are any questions, comments, arguments. Anyway.
So, Chris, could you comment on what defines a democracy? So, there are a number of countries in the world that call themselves democracies, but one wonders whether they truly are democracies. And Hungary, for example, you say it's the most democratic government, but they did elect Orban, and Orban was re-elected only just after having changed the judicial system and all a bunch of other stuff. So, how does one preserve true democracy? And how does one define it? How does one preserve it?
Well, again, I'd refer you back to the EU.
Chris,
So the
Chris,
EU has,
Chris, sorry.
Yes.
Can you talk the online?
Oh, okay.
The question.
So the question was, how do you define democracy? E.g., Hungary is a member of the EU and qualifies as democracy, but there's the problem with Viktor Orban. Well, as I say, I refer back to the EU itself. It has criteria. You could apply the same criteria there. So Hungary, you're right, is a member and it is a democracy, I suppose. But the Prime Minister is problematic in terms of his views of his party. What can I say?
But in your models, let's say a country is a democracy and it becomes part of this security alliance, and then that democracy elects an autocrat, like Hitler.
Well,
do they get kicked out? You know,
yes,
the other countries judge them to be not a democracy anymore, so they're turfed out. Is that
yes? I imagine the other members would have to sort of appeal or set up a process. Maybe the court would judge whether they still satisfy the criteria, and if they don't satisfy the criteria, they'd have to leave the community. Fair enough. Yeah.
So one of the things that you said this would do is provide assurance of peace and security to the members of this coalition of the willing.
Yes.
So in terms of our current, the decade of peace in the Western world, at least, that have happened recently, a lot of people have called it Pax Americana. Imagining, we know where the US has, at the moment under Trump, it's a bit different. So what would a coalition of the willing look like without the US?
What would a coalition of the willing look like without the US? Well, it would look like the present coalition of the willing. So it embraces all of Europe who are feeling very severe threat from Russia. The Baltic states are feeling very exposed, etc. And we in the Indo-Pacific are feeling threats from China, right? So what was the question? Yes.
What would it look like?
I suppose the question is not very what would its potential for really providing peace and security to its members with the US being outside of it potentially, and potentially an enemy of this coalition if their interests on the line.
Well, I go back to the idea of deterrence. If had an Article 5, if one member was attacked, all other members would have to come to their defence, which is the core of an alliance. Then
so what country has the US, China, Russia, and the coalition of the willing?
Yes. Well, neither Russia nor China, I think, would dare challenge such a large coalition. I mean, it rather depends on the US in the end. If they are involved, then no argument. If they stand on the sidelines, it probably can't defend Taiwan on its own. And we see Taiwan go down in flames. That would be a huge disaster on its own. But the idea is, at least, if we can do that beforehand, we can deter China from starting because they wouldn't be able to challenge it. Yeah.
I guess in a way where I was going with the democracy issue was it's possibly very simplistic, but I have heard it said that no war has ever been fought between two democracies. But that depends how you define democracy. So perhaps we just need to get every country being a democracy, true democracy, and then there's no need for a umbrella government or security organisation.
Well, that would be the ideal world. Every country was democratic, sorry.
So can you what he said?
If all the world countries were democratic, we wouldn't need such a mechanism. That's true. But just in case something happens between two countries, we would have security forces ready to prevent any conflict. We would have judicial mechanisms, universal laws, which would prevent any conflict. So there'd be the mechanisms there to prevent any conflict actually occurring in the first place. But not only that, we've mentioned there are all these other global problems. So it would have the power to deal with climate change effectively. It would be able to relieve these hundreds of millions of people living in camps around the world. They're spending their entire lives in tents, suffering hunger, some of them starving to death from disease.
I think there's a number of organisations that rank countries by, including Freedom House, but there's BDM and others that have different definitions and different indicators to discretely determine level of democracy. I think you were talking about if that score falls below a certain level, there would be consequences. They could no longer be a part of that coalition. What would those penalties look like, and how would that stop a similar sort of hungry situation happening if there were backsliders?
Yes. I don't think there would be any penalties as such. They would just no longer be a member of the community, and they would no longer receive the development funds. The incentives would be gone. I don't think there's anything more. We don't want to start a new conflict,
Yeah.
With a backslider.
I'll just chime in here. Again, we're now in the speculative realm. I mean, I guess this whole thing is in the speculative realm. So we can't say for sure. It depends what the people who get together and draft these rules. But my guess is in a situation, let's say, of a backslider, whether it's Hungary or whatever. My best guess would be like accrediting agencies looking at universities. That when, at least in the US, for a university to be official, it gets visited by an accrediting agency. If they pass it, and maybe 10 years later, they backslide. They're not handling student loans right. They're not doing whatever. The accrediting agency tells them where they're deficient and grants them 2 years, 6 years, whatever, to bring it back up to accreditation standards. And then they come back and visit again. They ask for reports in the interim. They do other site visits to help them out. And if it's clear that they get back in the good graces of the standards, then they're back in. If not, they pull the plug and they no longer get the benefits. The students there can't get student loans. I mean, all of the things. So my guess is they would probably work something like that.
Are you not assuming that people know what's good for them? I mean, Britain voted for Brexit. And they look at the European Union. So,
well, yes, it's politics. Things go back and forth. You can't guarantee we're always going to behave sensibly, but one has to trust, I suppose.
Yeah, I guess I'm saying that they will behave themselves because they will lose the benefits.
Yes. I mean, I think there's some movement to get Britain back in the EU. I don't know how far it's going.
There is.
I guess the issue with Brexit, and maybe the issue with this, is open borders. So is a world government synonymous with open borders globally? You can imagine if everybody gets one vote, you can imagine a proposition going to the world government. Borders should be open, and there'll be an overwhelming majority. What does that mean for economies?
Well, the transition period would be difficult, but if we had a proper global democracy, there wouldn't be these conflicts. We wouldn't have the refugees. We wouldn't have displaced persons living by the thousands in tents, because the conflicts that create that would not occur.
They might still occur in the autocracy, but
Well, yes, but the autocracies are outside. I mean, this is in the lead-up period, I suppose. So in the ideal world, there are no autocracies.
Let me jump in on that. First, just to echo Chris's point, the main drivers of migration will be mitigated, and that's one hope. So people won't be fleeing war zones, they won't be fleeing famines, they won't be fleeing all those things, and most people don't want to. I mean, they have their communities, they have their people, they have their land. So a lot of people would rather not run if the conditions were better where they are. So as Chris pointed out, what was the term you said? Was that solidarity, bringing all the nations up? So my guess would be that once that happens, I mean, in the ideal world, once that happens, then going from one country to another would be equivalent from going from one state to another within Australia. That all of the countries, in a sense, become states in a world country. Ultimately, that's the goal.
And so this is a really good point.
Mhm.
It depends on, and that goes to your point about Brexit, and some of the tensions in the EU, even with this very attractiveness of trying to get out of the EU for larger EU members who feel like they're paying for the smaller economic powers in the bloc. So for that solidarity to happen across this coalition of the willing, there would need to be a massive redistribution, which would be more fair, yes. But I can't imagine the larger economic powers wanting to, unless there is a crisis, but willingly being happy to subsidize in their eyes.
Well, I think it would take time. So, yeah, they would say there's limits on what we're going to provide, and it would take decades again for the world to equalise. The ideal is eventually, over decades, maybe hundreds of years.
Before you talked about a weighted voting system.
Yes.
And also in your paper you talk about what specific majorities, like majorities within a voting block or voting system of requiring a majority of 75%. When you say weighted voting, do you mean country's vote is based on its population, or do you mean that absolute or the level of majority being 2/3, 75%, whatever? Or do you mean individual countries have more say because they've got more people?
Grace, can you repeat that part?
Sorry. So Sid's asking about qualified majority voting. What would that mean and how does that work? Again, I appeal to the EU, which has a qualified majority voting system. You don't want the most populous country, say China, to become democratic, but its citizens dominate everybody else. They win the vote every time. So there's been discussions on this. There's a system called the Penrose system. A guy named Roger Penrose, I think. I've discussed it in an appendix to my presentation. But anyway, the EU has such a system so that the bigger members don't completely dominate the vote. So it's roughly speaking, the vote is proportional to the square root of the population rather than the population itself. Very good, roughly.
Yeah, but there's that principle of one vote, one ballot. For example,
well, I mean, there are two parts. There's an actual parliament, and then there's the council of ministers, or the house which represents the component governments. So France and Germany don't. So it's the council of ministers, so they have equal voice in the decisions of the community. And I think the qualified majority voting, it doesn't apply to everything. So very serious decisions demand consensus. But ordinary, everyday decisions involve, I think, a qualified majority vote. But I'd have to refer to it. I think,
For example, Australia and China, the weighting credit rating is 8 times the benefit of Australia. You get 8 times compared to an alternative system where there's one which we have in Australia, which every person eligible vote gets one vote, and that vote counts the same as the person's sitting next. And that's Chris's credit rating system. You get 8 votes to China's person's 1 vote. Since the population is 8 squared times within the house.
But two blue would get,
Yeah.
25.
Yeah.
yes, but anyway, it's an issue which has to be addressed.
We might be happy.
Well,
As I hear you, I personally see there is a way forward. But as we want to see the world, our position is very weak.
our position.
Our position, the way we are thinking.
Okay.
One of the serious issues may arise that we were saying, matter of Taiwan.
Right.
Maybe in a couple of years' time, maybe 5 years' time, is Taiwan is attacked by China, for example.
Yes.
If the world will see a very different impact. Let's say Taiwan will flame, and the rest of the world is not just sitting and seeing, meaning that third world war may happen. If it does happen, we maybe get back to the square one again.
Well, I mean, it's just a local issue. Some probably similar issues would come in. I mean, it all depends again on Donald Trump. He and his offsiders have been very straightforward in saying they wouldn't allow China to cross the strait. But they may give up. Taiwan rates is one of the top 4 or 5 democracies in the world. It's one of the most democratic countries there is. And it's got this huge semiconductor, it's an important country. To see it go under in flames would be an absolute disaster.
Chris, can I just jump in? Something I said in the first part that where you came in after that our hope and the hope of this movement since the 1940s was to build something strong enough that would be a deterrent to something like that happen. Any autocratic nuclear nation, whatever. However, as I said earlier, it took World War I to create the League of Nations. It took World War II to create the United Nations. It might take World War III or a major ecological global disaster or something to create what we're talking about. We might not succeed. Okay? You know, something may go up in flames. And then we'll have to sit down with what happens after and say, okay, the world's been through this 3 times now. Do we want to do it again? Or do we want to organize the way the world governs itself in a more sane way? So we're trying to avoid that. That's our hope. And the stakes are greater with every day that passes. So that's the game we're playing now. We're trying to beat the clock and build something before then.
I agree. At the present time, there's certain similarities to the period before World War II. We've got these problems confronting us. What can we do about it?
Do you have any comments on Iran's situation?
Which one?
Iran?
Iran.
No, because it's very recent and looks like a chaotic situation.
Yes, who knows? It's hard to see any positive outcome at the moment, but fingers crossed. I mean, it shows that was a totalitarian state, basically. And it's not as strong as it looks. I saw an article about a bank collapse, apparently started this whole business because people well, they've lost a huge amount of money. The currency's been devalued, etc. So it's a very weak system, but it's also autocratic, so heaven knows.
Collapses here necessarily. It can happen anywhere.
Yes, yes.
Chris, my question is focused on contingency plans. So the idea of the coalition of willing can only work if major democracies participate. So
Yes.
say if one of those democracies doesn't participate, have you envisaged any contingency plans?
Chris,
no,
Chris,
it's a fairly new
Chris,
idea.
Chris, sorry, can you repeat this to the cyber space people?
Yes, so the question was about
Contingency plan.
contingency plans if all the coalition willing didn't agree. No, we haven't got there yet. Maybe we need ideally we'd have to start with a smaller group, like the original 6 in the EU, but it's hard to see a suitable group at the moment. So
it's kind of a comment, but I'm really impressed with the ideas in your paper, and I think it's one of the most practical, achievable ways forward that I've seen in a long time. And so I really commend you for it as a paper. But I think now is the time. I think starting a text and looking at and seeing which levels of engagement countries are prepared to sign up to, it's ready now. And timing is perfect because the latest national security strategy really has scared Europe and driven them into Australians and Canada's arms. And they are coming together very swiftly because they might be facing conflict over Greenland.
yes,
So
yes.
I think the time is now.
Well, I agree.
Rather than people talk about future generations, let's make it ours. Let's make it happen.
Yes, well, I mean, we should do all we can, which for a small group we're talking is not a great deal, but as you know, we're talking to some government officials today. Australia is in a good position, it seems to me, to take the initiative on all of this. So it's a leading democracy, it's in the Indo-Pacific area, so it feels under threat from China. I think we said earlier, Penny Wong has just recently agreed that reform of the UN in some form is necessary. Hopefully we might be able to do something. So, you know, we need to try and persuade the government to do what they can.
Can we, based on our talks, if we can frame a proposal, can we send it to the government to consider and get back to us so that we can initiate a dialogue?
Then we should ask them to start a new inquiry. Yes, we can certainly try that. We'll try that.
Yeah, then it initiates the dialogue.
Yes.
And because the government has got more experience in terms of leading the nation,
yes,
and as a participant of global administration, they might be able to give us clearer idea. This is what we need, even if they don't do it. But we need more clearer idea and practical steps to our life.
Yes, no, we must try it.
Chris, does everyone know who we're meeting with right after this meeting?
No, I'm not sure.
I want to tell them.
Should we make it public? I'm not sure.
Oh, is it not? Well, as I said, we're meeting with government officials at 4 o'clock today. They have an initial, to hopefully open up an ongoing dialogue. I'll leave it there.
Yeah.
Something to reach national security.
Yeah.
I have a question about, so the model that you're proposing, and so earlier there were discussions about what would it take to, so we need the participation of important democracies, major democracies to be able to make this model happen. And there are potentially some barriers for some to want to join. Are there any examples of this type of governance arrangements that you can point to, maybe on a smaller scale, which have shown the benefits for all the members over time? I'm thinking No, no, is that, you were describing some of the governance arrangements, which would be quite specific. Is that something that has been tested in communities, for example, or in other settings, where you can say, benefits?
The EU went through all that, so basically it's taken from the EU example, I would say, yeah.
Yeah, the EU is the most contemporary example of another layer being added. But going back to the US, as I showed, and then Switzerland, I mean, any country that has federated and added a federal government over it has done this. You know, I mean, that's what it is, bringing different clusters together and adding another layer. So you have the diversity and you have the unity. So this has happened many times, just not on the global level. That's the missing link, the final step.
Okay, Luis says he has a couple of questions from the online participants.
Yes, that's correct. I have a question from an online participant, Nigel Davidson.
Say it to the camera. Right.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yeah, great.
Okay.
Oh, great. Well, I put it in the chat as well. I think that the European Union does stand out for being a model, at least a more recent model. I've kind of got two different questions. What lessons can we learn from that? And the second idea is it possible that it might be a nucleus for a world federation rather than a model or a regional organization? So I don't know if anybody has comments on that. So it's a little different to what you're saying. It's a little tangent, Chris, which is maybe a bit different to your idea, but I thought I'd share that.
Yes. Well, I know we're trying to draw as many lessons as we can from the historical accounts of the EU. I don't know what more we can do, but could the EU itself be the nucleus of a world parliament, if you like? It's possible in principle, but in practice we see other regional unions forming. The African Union, there's the Pacific Islands Forum, to go down the scale. There's Mercosur in South America. There's various regional organizations forming. They could amalgamate in the end, but I think, again, the EU would probably say they want to stick to the governance of their particular region.
I throw in two things. One, as far as lessons, one of the things the EU has successfully shown is they can create political parties across nations. I don't know that.
Yeah.
So the Greens is not in one country; it's across Europe. You know, the other parties there, which is a major kind of out of the box thinking. That's probably something that, when and if there's a world federation, will also happen. So there are a number of lessons like that we could learn from there. But as far as other countries, you know, Australia, other countries joining the EU, for example, that you may not have heard this, that actually is one of the proposals floating around in our movement. People have talked about that why not just, you know, at some point change the name European Union and let other countries in, and then it becomes a union of democracies that's not geographically based. And then so there's no reason in principle why that can't happen. It would only be if the people working on the EU for however many years have kind of nationalism for the EU and don't want any strangers in, you know. But in principle, the mechanics, sure, why not? It's like adding another country. They're just not, you know, continuous. Yeah,
that's true. But the EU does have one problem in that it's still not a defence community. I mean, there's still not a European defence force.
Right. They don't have a unified law yet. Yeah.
There was a proposal for one right at the beginning, 1950 or so, but it was voted down even in France, and then everybody abandoned the idea. So it's coming back. They're trying to build up some sample forces, and they're thinking about forming a defence union, if like, but it hasn't happened yet. From the perspective I was advocating, it's not quite suitable, I suppose. Yeah, thanks for the idea.
Hand behind you.
Thank you.
There are hands behind you.
Sorry. My question is, can you remember what those reasons were, back in the origins of the EU that standing army didn't go ahead in France? You mentioned.
The reasons why it didn't go ahead. I'd have to look that up. I'd have to read it up. But I think they thought it was going too far, basically. The government, I think, put it to the people, maybe with a referendum, but it was voted down. It was a step too far.
Yeah, and if I could just add to that, I don't know about the EU's case, but historically, in situations like this, many countries don't want to put their soldiers under the command of other nations leaders and things like that. That's come up in a number of cases.
Yes.
Yeah. We'll go to war with you, you know, country A will say to country B, but our soldiers are under our command. We're not giving them to you. So that's, you know, another one of these, you know, kind of things. Yeah.
What is saying that, given the current situation in Palestine and Israel, where in principle, like there could be multinational forces,
right,
to make a buffer zone between these two, I wouldn't say enemies. And if that is successful, this could be another sample of how peace can be ensured. The areas where people or governments or communities want to find each other.
Yes, I mean, let's hope it does, but I mean, it depends on the agreements of the governing or countries involved to begin with. So that is sort of happening for the time being, right?
Yeah.
Stage 2 is the testing ground. Let's cross our fingers. That's all.
That's what I'm saying. If it works.
But if we had such a security community, they could provide the peacekeeping or peace building force in a situation like that, outside their own borders, under UN supervision or agreement. We really have to agree.
Yeah. And if I could piggyback on that, I mean, I don't agree with that, but let me also add that in many situations like that, I mean, Israel, Palestine is an example, but many situations like that, in both countries or in both territories, you have people who are the peacekeepers in both, who are already talking to each other, and they're kept out of the negotiations largely. It's the right wing or whatever they're called in their countries, you know, that are often the ones who get the press, who get the, you know, the exposure and all that. If I were involved, if I were part of the world government, then what I would advocate for is getting the peacekeepers on both sides who've been trying to resolve it, get them in the room together to first into mediation, and then if not, you take it to court. They sue each other. They take it out of the battlefield into the courtroom, and then you have an enforceable decision. That's how disputes will get resolved once, instead of when we have law, not war. Okay? The old slogan of the World Federalist Movement, instead of having the law of force in the world, we have the force of law in the world. To flip that. So the first part is a mediation process, and get the peacekeepers in, not the right wing on both sides. And then if that doesn't work, you go to court, you sue. That's the process. And you have the peacekeepers there in the meantime to keep the peace.
I agree that the court process is fundamental to enforcing law, and I'm guessing the legal structure is not the ICJ, the International Court of Justice. It's a new legal body created within the Democratic Coalition.
Yes.
What about the issue of judicial appointments, how judges are appointed and by whom, and the political process behind that. Any thoughts there?
The short answer is no, I don't have any thought. I just have to refer you back to the EU, I don't know how it's done there. But they have they have a court outside the EU, right? The
European Court of Human Rights.
Something like that, but then there's a court within the EU, I believe, which I forget which, well, it's a while ago, that would adjudicate disputes between members.
The many questions that are being asked, and most times you are referring to EU. Can we summarize based on the questions, what could be answers from the experience of the EU so that we are informed communities? Because when you refer to EU, I don't have much clue what you are referring to, because I don't understand that process very much. But even some of the common questions may be asked, or when you go anywhere in the world, what groups people ask, can we have just transparent and better understanding of how you address those and how we can take those examples, for example, in Asia Pacific, peace. So,
good question. So I should say 30 years ago, I took a sabbatical and self-published a book on these topics. The title is World Parliament Principles of World Federation. And I discussed the EU, so that contains virtually all I know about. So I can refer you to my book. There'll be later books still. I don't know.
Well, Andreas's is the most recent.
Which one?
Andreas's, yeah.
Andreas Blum would be
a World Parliament. If I understood what you were saying correctly, though, I want to agree with what you were saying, that if nations decide this is a good idea, we should move in this direction, probably over the next 2 or 3 years, then legal scholars from around, I mean, these questions, like the question that you're asking, with several questions, will then be raised, and will, a room like this will be filled with legal scholars, folks from the EU represented, folks from different countries who've wrestled with these, and then they'll have to hash it out to see what's the most workable way if this kind of situation comes up to do it. And then it gets put in a bill proposed, the World Parliament then will accept it, and then it becomes law. So this is not, we don't have the solutions to all these things. We're not that far down the road. We just know, again, intuitively, like I said at the beginning of my presentation, the moment I heard about this intuitively, of course, because the structure we have now, we're failing on climate change, we're failing on preventing war, we're failing on all these things, and all the metrics are going in the wrong direction, because everything's globalized except democracy. We don't have the structure to handle it. But once enough nations decide that we need to make the change, then the hard work starts. Then you have to get all the people together and have the world's best thinking of how do we do this, because it's only the future of humanity that's at stake. So we don't have the answers to all that stuff, but we have the basic commitment to knowing about the rightness of having to govern the world in an effective way, rather than the way that it's being governed now.
Just for example, you are going to meet with some government representatives where, as I understand, they don't want to hear, they don't want to understand.
We'll find that out in an hour.
It is our job to present in a way so that they feel we should hear, and they feel that we should be doing something about it. That's why we're talking about, because it's our agenda, it's not government's. Our agenda we want to place to government so that they understand what we are talking about and they take a positive step towards that. So that's why that's my point I can show. Simple, they don't want to hear, they don't want to understand.
Right.
But we need to make them hear and we need to make them understand. Because they have their own policy, they have got their agenda, they have got, coalitionism, they have got their own policies.
I don't think, I wouldn't take such a negative view. I think they're happy to, in fact, they must be happy to discuss these. Anyway, we'll see what impact we can make.
That's what we have to say.
We've been talking since 11, right? So about 4 hours, okay? Oh, well, counting that, counting out lunch. We have an hour meeting with them. Our hope is to create a relationship and open the dialogue where we can meet more in the future and just give them a real basic overview of the idea.